There is a road on the south shore of Long Island called Ocean Parkway. It runs for 27 miles along a thin strip of Barrier Island, the Atlantic Ocean on one side, wetlands on the other. Miles of marsh grass and saltwater scrub that most people drive through at 70 miles an hour and never look at twice. Almost no one walks along Ocean Parkway. No one is supposed to. It sits close enough to New York City to be convenient, far enough from everything else to be invisible. The kind of place that exists in most states. A road that connects two places people actually want to be, running through a corridor that nobody notices. Somebody understood that about this road. Between 1993 and 2010, 8 women were killed and left here. Some wrapped, some partial remains, some scattered across 2 different crime scenes miles apart. Some were found within months. Some were not found for over a decade. A few spent years as nothing but a case designation, a Jane Doe number, on a file that no one was actively working. This is not a story about one night on a beach. This is not a story that ends cleanly. This is 30 years, 8 women, and a system that, for most of that time, chose not to look. December 1993, Southampton, Long Island, the Hamptons. A stretch of wooded land on the eastern end of Long Island, the kind of area that in summer is full of vacation homes and manicured lawns, and in December is completely empty. It was hunters who found her, off the trail in the brush near North Sea. No identification, not reported missing locally. She had been dead for some time before anyone came across her. What the medical examiner documented was not the work of a robbery or a struggle gone wrong. There were numerous sharp force injuries to her face, her torso, her breasts, her left thigh. Wounds that served no purpose except the inflicting of them. This was someone who had taken his time, someone for whom the killing was not the only point. In 1993, no one read that scene as the beginning of anything. They read it as a single, savage act. Investigators worked it. They ran fingerprints. They checked missing persons reports across the region. Her name was Sandra Costilla. She was 28 years old. She had been born Sandra Rajkumar in Sangre Grande, Trinidad and Tobago, in 1965, and her childhood had already taken more than most. Both of her parents died when she was young. She and her younger brother, Manny, were left orphaned, raised between Sangre Grande and Arima. At 17, she left the island for the United States, looking for the kind of life that her start had not promised her. She settled in New York. She was working as an escort in 1993. That meant advertising in the back pages of newspapers and city magazines. Phone numbers listed in small print. No digital trail, no way to trace who she had last spoken to, or where she had last been. That last part mattered more than investigators probably understood at the time. Southampton is 60 miles from Gilgo Beach. There was no forensic thread between her case and anything else, no geography, no pattern that had yet revealed itself, no reason to think she was anything other than a standalone case on the east end of Long Island. It was filed. It went cold. Her family back in Trinidad and Tobago knew she was gone. They did not know who had taken her. They did not know that the answer was living an ordinary life in a quiet suburb called Massapequa Park, commuting into Manhattan, running an architecture firm, going home at the end of the day. They would wait 31 years. In June 2024, Sandra Costilla became the earliest known victim in what prosecutors called a 17-year pattern of murder. She was the first. The 20th of April 1996, Fire Island, New York. What a man found on the bay shore that morning stopped him mid-step. Human legs, both of them, partially buried in the sand near the waterline. No other remains in the surrounding area. No clothing. Nothing that said who this person was or how they got here. Suffolk County detectives arrived. Medical examiners followed. They cataloged what was there, searched the beach in both directions, and found nothing else. A case was opened, female victim, approximately mid-30s, manner of death undetermined, identity unknown. She was entered into the system as Fire Island Jane Doe. Nobody knew it yet, but the rest of her was somewhere else entirely. Go back 6 weeks, Valentine's Day, the 14th of February, 1996. A 34-year-old woman named Karen Vergata had last been seen in New York City. She was living in Hell's Kitchen, on the west side of Midtown Manhattan. Her life by then had narrowed in the way these lives so often had. She had children, but she had not seen them since 1992, when they were taken from her by child welfare. Whatever had happened in the years before, by 1996, she was largely on her own. Around Valentine's Day that year, she called her father. It was the last time anyone in her family would hear her voice. She was an escort, not through an agency privately. Word of mouth, discreet advertisements, clients arranged without a paper trail, no service tracking her appointments, no record of who she was meeting or where she was going. In 1996, that was simply how that world worked. Cash transactions, no contracts, no one officially responsible for knowing where you were. When she didn't come back, the people in her life noticed. A missing persons report was filed. What happened next was not unusual. It was not the result of one bad decision or one careless investigator. It was the result of a system that had no mechanism for connecting what it couldn't see was connected. A missing woman in one jurisdiction, partial remains found in another. Different precincts, different case numbers, different investigators, with full caseloads, and no reason to look at each other's files. Karen Vergata's missing persons report and the Fire Island Jane Doe case were never compared. She was 34 years old, and she had officially simply vanished. 15 years passed. In April 2011, a search along Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach, a search that by then had become something much larger than anyone had expected, turned up a human skull. It had been there a long time. The elements had done their work. Identification would require forensic technology that barely existed yet. It was August 2023 before anyone had an answer. 27 years after Karen Vergata disappeared on Valentine's Day, DNA analysis confirmed that the skull found at Gilgo Beach was hers. Her legs on Fire Island, her skull along Ocean Parkway. The man who left her there had split her remains across 2 separate locations, 12 miles apart, and it had taken 3 decades, 2 separate investigations, and technology from another era entirely to put her back together. 1 month after she was finally identified, the man responsible was arrested outside his office on West 36th Street, Midtown Manhattan. He had been going to work every day for 30 years. November 2000, Manorville, Long Island. A dog found what its owner missed. The animal pulled its handler off the trail into a wooded stretch of rural land in eastern Suffolk County and stopped. What it had found had been there for some time. When Suffolk County detectives and medical examiners arrived and documented what was there, it was not something that could be explained by accident or panic. The remains of a young woman had been bound with rope, placed inside a black plastic bag, and wrapped tightly with duct tape. Her head was not present. Both of her hands had been severed. One of her legs was missing. This was not a body left in a hurry. This was staged, deliberate, the work of someone who had either done this before or fully intended to do it again. What detectives documented at that scene was, by any investigative standard, organized beyond what most homicide investigators see in a career. The surrounding area was searched in a wide radius. Forensic teams combed through what was there. No prints, no trace evidence, no witnesses along the rural road where she had been left. Nothing to indicate how she had arrived or who had brought her. She was assigned the case designation Jane Doe number 6. She had a name. Valerie Mack, 24 years old. She had been born in Philadelphia in 1976 and placed, as a small child, into foster care, then adopted by a family named Mack, who gave her their name and a home in New Jersey. She had a young son of her own. In the fall of 1999, she was hospitalized with pericarditis, an inflammation around the heart, and afterward she moved back in with her adoptive family and took a job at a Dollar Tree in Egg Harbor Township. For a while, it looked like steadier ground. By 2000, she was working as an escort in Philadelphia under the name Melissa Taylor, a name that had nothing to do with the other young woman in this story. She moved between Philadelphia and New York, the way many women in that work did at the time. No agency behind her, no safety structure, no official record of her appointments, her clients, or where she was going on any given night. She was last seen by her family in Port Republic, New Jersey, in the spring or summer of 2000. And here is the part that should not be possible. When her family realized she was gone and tried to file a missing persons report, they were turned away. Valerie was an adult, they were told. She had probably left on her own. No report was taken. By the time her torso was found in the woods at Manorville that November, there was no missing person on file to match it to. Detectives had a body in the woods and nothing to pull on. What no one knew yet, what no one would know for 11 more years, was that the rest of Valerie Mack was not in Manorville. In April 2011, a search along Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach, a search that by that point had expanded into something far larger than anyone had originally planned, recovered a plastic bag containing a head, hands, and a foot. Testing tied them to the torso that had been lying in evidence storage since Manorville in 2000. The same person, left in two places. But she still had no name. For another 9 years, she remained Jane Doe number 6. It was not until May 2020, through forensic genetic genealogy, the same family tree DNA technique that would later crack so much of this case, that the torso in the woods and the bag at the beach finally got their name back. Valerie Mack. She had been left in two places, Manorville and Gilgo Beach, miles apart, 11 years apart. The man who put her there had been confident enough to split her remains across two separate locations. And wait. At Rex Heuermann's sentencing in June 2026, Valerie's mother stood in the Riverhead courtroom and looked at the man responsible for her daughter's death. "She had dreams," she said, "and you took them all away from her." July 2003, Manorville, Long Island. The investigators who walked into those woods in July 2003 recognized the landscape. 3 years earlier, same county, same remote stretch of eastern Suffolk County, a young woman's remains had been found in the same kind of wooded terrain, a black plastic bag, bound, dismembered. A crime scene that spoke of someone with a method, not someone in a panic. Now, here again, it was a person walking a dog who found the first of her head and her arms, in the brush, a young woman. The same deliberate staging as before, pieces of her missing, not from exposure or time, but removed before she was left here, removed as part of the process. And one detail that told investigators something about the mind behind this. On her body was a tattoo, a small red heart with an angel's wing. Someone had taken a blade to it and tried to carve it away. It was an attempt to erase her, to make her harder to name. It did not entirely work. Months later, a detective in Washington, D.C., looking at a description of that tattoo, recognized it and connected it to a young woman reported missing. And that was how Jessica Taylor first got her name back, roughly 7 months after she was found. Suffolk County homicide detectives cross-referenced the Valerie Mack case immediately. The geography was the same. The method was the same. The signature, if you were prepared to call it that, was the same. And for the first time, in what would become one of the longest unsolved cases in Long Island history, someone asked the question out loud, is this the same person? Her name was Jessica Taylor, 20 years old. The people who loved her remembered a young woman who was funny, who lived to make people laugh, and who was good with children. She had worked as an aide at a summer camp for inner-city kids. She had 2 brothers she played with growing up, and a mother she would still curl up next to on the couch. Loving, her mother said. Loving and compassionate, and so funny. That was who she was before the word escort became the only thing a case file recorded about her. She had been working independently in New York, no agency, no formal appointments, no record of who her clients were or where she went on any given night. When she stopped appearing, people who knew her filed a report. The report had gone nowhere. Now, in a way no one had wanted, it had. Investigators worked the scene with the 2000 case open in front of them. They documented, they searched the surrounding area. They were careful about what they concluded. 2 cases, same area, same staging, same level of deliberate organization. Not proof, not yet. But no investigator who walked out of those Manorville woods in July 2003 believed they were looking at something isolated. The working assumption had shifted. They were right. They were just years away from knowing how right. In 2011, when investigators conducting a wider search along Ocean Parkway recovered additional human remains, testing matched a portion of them to Jessica Taylor. Like Valerie Mack before her, she had been left in 2 places. Part of her in Manorville since July 2003. The rest along Gilgo Beach for just as long. He had placed them in 2 separate locations and driven home. At Rex Heuermann's sentencing in June 2026, Jessica's cousin, Violet Swager, stood in the Riverhead courtroom and looked directly at him. "You chose small women," she said, "because you are nothing more than a weak, disgusting coward." Her cousin, Jasmine Robinson, stood after her. She looked at him for a long moment. "A million years," she said, "isn't enough." 4 years passed. The Manorville cases stayed open. They stayed connected in the minds of investigators who had worked them 2 crime scenes. Same remote stretch of Suffolk County, same deliberate staging. But a connection on paper is not an arrest. Without a suspect, without a thread that led anywhere, the files sat. July 2007, Long Island, New York. Maureen Brainard Barnes was 25 years old, from Norwich, Connecticut, raised up the coast in Groton. The people who knew her remembered a reader, a girl who loved books and had wanted, at one time, to be a writer. She was a mother of 2 young children, and everything she did in the last stretch of her life, she did to keep them. She had been out of sex work for 7 months. By every account from the people who knew her, she had been genuinely trying. 7 months of looking for another income, another way to stay housed, another way to keep the family together. Then the money ran out, and the eviction came. She needed about $3,000. $3,000, standing between her and losing her children. So she made a decision a lot of mothers in her position have made. A few days in the city, enough to cover it. Then, home. She went back. She advertised through Craigslist, the adult services section that by 2007 had become the primary way women in that work found clients. Anonymous, fast. A phone number, a price, an arrangement made by text or voicemail, with no intermediary and no record of who was on the other end. She had done this before. She knew how it worked. What she couldn't know, what none of them could, was that someone had been watching that section of Craigslist, searching it, making contact, and that the man on the other end of those calls was not a client she would come home from. The 9th of July, 2007. She took the train into Manhattan to work for a few days. That night, at 11:43, she called a friend back in Connecticut. It was the last time anyone who loved her would hear her voice. 3 days later, her phone pinged a cell tower along the Long Island Expressway in Suffolk County, east of where she lived, moving into the stretch of Long Island that two open case files already knew something about. After that, the phone went dark. Her family filed a missing persons report. Investigators took it. What they had was almost nothing: a Craigslist profile, a phone trail that went east and stopped. No client records, no names, no way into the arrangement she had been making, or who had been on the other side of it. The case opened. It did not go far. Her son was 7. Her daughter was 1. They grew up without her. December 2010, Ocean Parkway, Gilgo Beach. A search of the north side of the road, a search that had begun for an entirely different reason, looking for an entirely different woman, found Maureen Brainerd Barnes within a quarter-mile of 3 other women who would be identified in the same search. She had been bound with 3 leather belts. When Rex Heuermann was charged with her murder, part of the evidence was a single hair recovered from the buckle of one of the belts used to bind her lower body. The DNA on it did not belong to Maureen. It traced to a profile investigators had quietly built from Heuermann's own wife, Asa Ellerup. They had retrieved a drink she discarded on a commuter train and pulled her DNA from it. The hair on the belt was consistent with someone from Ellerup's household, with the man she was married to. He had carried something of his home life with him, left it there. At sentencing, Maureen's sister, Melissa Cann, stood in the courtroom. "I carried guilt for decades," she said, "wondering if I could have done something more, whether I could have protected her." She paused. "It was a weight I carried everywhere. But it is not mine to carry. It is for Rex, and Rex alone." 2009, the Bronx, New York. Melissa Barthelemy was 24 years old. She had grown up in Buffalo, the oldest of 3 sisters, a girl who loved cosmetology and fashion and dreamed of being a stylist. She trained for it beauty school, a real plan, and in 2007, she moved to New York City to chase it. She settled into a basement apartment in the Bronx and worked as a hairdresser. But the city was expensive, the money was thin, and so she also worked as an escort advertising through Backpage and Craigslist, the online classifieds that by 2009 had almost entirely replaced the back pages of print magazines for women in that work. Digital, fast, anonymous on both sides. What that flat word, escort, hides is the rest of her. She sent money home to her mother and her sisters. She stayed close to them. On the 10th of July 2009, she deposited $1,000 at her bank money from a client, and that evening, she was last seen sitting on the curb outside her Bronx apartment, waiting for a ride to meet a man she said she'd be back from by morning. She had a younger sister named Amanda. Amanda was 15. The 10th of July 2009. Melissa didn't come home. Days passed. Her family tried her phone. It rang out. They tried again. And then, one afternoon, the call went through. Someone answered. It wasn't Melissa. The man on the line was calm, completely calm. He asked specifically for Amanda, hung up immediately if anyone else picked up. He was always brief, never more than 3 minutes. He called 7 times over the weeks that followed, from different crowded locations in Midtown Manhattan. He knew Amanda's name. He knew what her sister looked like. And he did not simply confess. He played with her. He asked her, on one of those calls, whether she thought she would ever see her sister again. He called Melissa a whore. He told a 15-year-old girl that he was the one who had her sister, and then, on a later call, words her family has carried ever since. "I'm watching your sister's body rot." He told her what he had done to Melissa, not because he had to, because he wanted to hear what it did to the girl on the other end. Amanda Funderburg was 15 years old. She picked up the phone 7 times and heard this. Investigators traced the calls, as well as 2009 technology allowed. They mapped the cell towers. The calls were coming from a tight cluster of blocks in Midtown Manhattan near Times Square, near Penn Station, along the stretch of West 36th Street. Commercial blocks, dense foot traffic, the kind of place where a man could make a 3-minute call and disappear into the lunch crowd before anyone looked twice. They had a pattern, they had a geography. They had 7 calls from a man who knew exactly what he was doing. What they didn't have was a name. Then the calls stopped. No final call, no explanation. They simply ended. The trail had gone cold in a way that felt deliberate, not like a man who had gotten scared, but like a man who had somewhere else to be. He did. Every year he left New York for the summer, traveled abroad, came back in the fall. When the calls resumed, he was back. Investigators had the cell tower data. They had the gap, though they didn't yet understand what the gap meant. They had 7 calls from a man who had killed a woman, taunted her teenage sister, and then stopped when it was convenient. That cell tower data would sit in a file for 13 years. Melissa Barthelomew's remains were found in December 2010 along the north side of Ocean Parkway, within a quarter mile of 3 other women found in the same search. In June 2026, Amanda Funderburg, no longer 15, now in her 30s, stood in the Riverhead courtroom and faced the man across the room. "You can look at me while I'm talking," she said. "It has been 17 years since we've spoken. I hope you suffer." The 1st of May, 2010, Oak Beach, Long Island. A 23-year-old woman named Shannon Gilbert called 911 at 4:51 inches the morning. She had been driven to Oak Beach that night by a man named Michael Pack to see a client, Joseph Brewer. She was an escort. She had been working. And at some point inside that gated beachfront community, something went very wrong. She called 911 and would not let go of the line. The call lasted nearly 23 minutes. On the recording, she drifts in and out, at moments clear, at moments slurring, at moments silent, and at moments screaming. The words that come through are the ones that haunt the case. "There's somebody after me. They're going to kill me." Both Brewer and Pak can be heard telling her to leave. At one point, she asks Pak directly whether he is going to kill her. Then she ran. She ran out into the dark and started banging on doors. She reached the home of a neighbor, Gus Coletti, an elderly man who called 911 himself and described a young woman, frantic, screaming that people were chasing her. She ran from his door too, to another neighbor, Barbara Brennan, who also called for help. And then she ran into the marsh behind the houses. By the time police arrived, Shannon Gilbert was gone. She was found 19 months later, in December 2011, in that same marsh about half a mile from where she was last seen. Her death was ruled an accidental drowning. Her family has disputed that ruling ever since, and continues to. But Shannon Gilbert's disappearance set something in motion. When police searched for her along the south shore of Long Island that winter, they weren't looking for what they found. Before that December, 2 more women had vanished. Megan Waterman was 22 years old, from Scarborough, Maine. She had become a mother at 17 to a girl named Liliana, and by every account from her family, that child was the center of her world. Megan loved her daughter, her brother said. Liliana was everything to her. She had met a man named Akeem Cruz from Brooklyn, and it was Cruz who convinced her she could make fast money working as an escort, and brought her down to New York to do it. She advertised online under the name Lexi, the same back-page listings, the same Craigslist adult sections that had become the standard way women in that work connected with clients. Transactional, untraceable, no record of who was on the other end. Here is the detail that tells you who she was. However far from home she went, Megan called her daughter 3 times a day, every day. The last of those calls came on the night of the 5th of June 2010. When the calls simply stopped, her family knew something was wrong because Megan not checking on Liliana was not something Megan did. She was last seen leaving a Holiday Inn Express in Hauppauge, Long Island. A strand of her hair found on the burlap used to wrap her remains would become the most important piece of physical evidence in this entire investigation. She didn't know that. She couldn't have. Amber Lynn Costello was 27 years old. She had been born in North Carolina, and the hard turns in her life had started early. She was molested by a neighbor at 6, a wound the family never fully recovered from. She'd been a promising student before drugs took hold in her teens. By her 20s, she was caught in addiction, heroin, bouncing between North Carolina, Florida, and finally Long Island, where her sister had tried to help her start over. She funded the addiction the way the others had, advertising online, meeting strangers for cash. She disappeared on the 2nd of September 2010. That night followed a script she and her roommate, David Schaller, had run before. A man had called offering $1,500, a large amount, large enough to lower anyone's guard. The plan was a robbery, not a date. Amber would take the cash, and Schaller would burst in playing the furious boyfriend, scaring the client off before anything happened. It had worked before. This time, Amber walked out to meet the man alone. She never came back. In the weeks before she vanished, that same client had been calling her over and over, obsessive, persistent in a way that had unsettled the people around her. Afterward, Schaller gave police a description he would not forget. A big, lumbering man he called ogre-like, a man who drove a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche. That description went into a case file. It sat there for 12 years. December 2010, Ocean Parkway. Police were looking for Shannon Gilbert. On December 11, searching a wooded strip along the north side of Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach, they found human remains wrapped in burlap. They kept searching. They found more. Within a quarter mile of each other, along less than 300 meters of road, investigators found the remains of 4 women, each one wrapped, each one bound. The same burlap, the same method, the same hands. Maureen Brainard Barnes, Melissa Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Lynn Costello. They had all been placed here, some years apart, some months, all within walking distance of each other, along a road that almost no one used, left beneath the scrub grass and salt marsh of the Long Island coast. The wider search that followed found more remains, matching Valerie Mack, more from Jessica Taylor, the skull from Fire Island that would eventually belong to Karen Vergata. Evidence that connected back through 2003, through 2000, through 1996, all the way back to 1993, and a woman from Trinidad and Tobago found 60 miles away. By the time investigators understood the full shape of what they were standing in, they knew they were not looking at isolated cases. They were looking at one person who had been doing this for close to 2 decades, and they had no idea who it was. The December 2010 discovery made national news. Long Island was gripped. Media vans lined Ocean Parkway. The FBI offered to assist. Forensic teams were deployed. There was briefly every appearance that the scale of what had been found would force a response at the same scale. It didn't. The man running law enforcement in Suffolk County was Police Chief James Burke, head of a department of over 2,000 people, the most powerful law enforcement figure on Long Island. Burke blocked the FBI from taking a meaningful role in the investigation. He denied requests to subpoena cell tower records, the exact records that, a decade later, would break the case wide open. He kept the investigation contained within his own department and away from federal oversight. He had reasons. In 2015, Burke resigned. He had been under federal investigation for a separate matter, a civil rights violation involving a suspect in his department's custody. He and District Attorney Tom Spota, who had run Suffolk County's prosecutorial office for years alongside him, were eventually charged with obstruction of justice for attempting to cover it up. Both were convicted. Burke served nearly 4 years in federal prison. Federal investigators described what the two of them had built in Suffolk County as something closer to a criminal enterprise than a law enforcement apparatus. Whether Burke's handling of the Gilgo Beach investigation was deliberate, obstruction, self-protection, or something else has never been formally established. What is documented is this. From 2010 to 2015, the most powerful law enforcement officer in Suffolk County kept the FBI out of an active serial murder investigation. During those 5 years, the investigation went nowhere. Burke's removal allowed the FBI to finally take a full role. But by then, the trail was cold. The Barthélemy cell tower data sat in a file. The avalanche description from Amber Costello's roommate sat in a file. The Manorville connections sat in files. Everything that had been gathered in the months after December 2010 sat in drawers that nobody had been permitted or motivated to act on. The families kept going. Melissa Cann gave interviews. Amanda Funderburg kept speaking publicly. Megan Waterman's family pushed. They did what families do when the system stops moving. They refused to let the story go quiet. The story went quiet anyway. From 2011 to 2021, there were no arrests. 10 years. In early 2022, Suffolk County's new commissioner, Rodney Harrison, formed a dedicated Gilgo Beach task force, not a continuation of what had come before. A fresh team, assigned specifically to this case, starting from the files. Among what they found were the Barthélemy phone records, the cell tower data that had been sitting in a drawer since 2009. Analysts plotted the towers the burner phone had used. The data narrowed to a small cluster of blocks in Massapequa Park, a quiet suburban community on the south shore of Long Island. They called it the Box. Then they pulled Amber Costello's file. The description from her roommate, 12 years old by then, came back up. Ogre-like. First generation Chevrolet Avalanche. Investigators ran vehicle registration records against the Box. The Avalanche, Massapequa Park. One name came back. Rex Heuermann. Rex Heuermann was 59 years old, a licensed architect with his own firm, RH Consultants and Associates, on West 36th Street in Midtown Manhattan, the same stretch of Midtown where the Barthélemy calls had been placed, the same towers. He had a wife, 2 children, a house in Massapequa Park where he had lived most of his adult life. He had been commuting into the city every day for 30 years. Investigators put him under surveillance. They watched him go to work. They watched him have lunch. They watched a man living a perfectly ordinary professional life in Midtown Manhattan. In January 2023, he walked out of a pizza restaurant on 5th Avenue and dropped a box of crusts into a trash can on the sidewalk. Detectives moved in the moment he was out of sight. They retrieved the box, sent it to the lab. On the 12th of June 2023, DNA extracted from the pizza crust was compared to a hair found on the burlap wrapping Megan Waterman's remains. It matched. The 13th of July 2023, Rex Heuermann was arrested outside his office. When they took him, he had a burner phone in his pocket. Another would be found at his office. He had never stopped 14 years after he taunted a 15-year-old girl. He was still carrying the kind of phone he had used to do it. He was in tears, his attorney said. "I didn't do this," he told them. He had been going to work every day for 30 years, in a building whose cell towers had been sitting in a police file since 2009, 3 blocks from where he had called a 15-year-old girl 7 times to tell her he had killed her sister. The charges against Rex Heuermann grew in the months after his arrest. 3 murders became 4, 4 became 7. DNA from his wife's discarded drink on a commuter train matched material from Maureen Brainerd Barnes's remains. Valerie Mack was added, Jessica Taylor, Sandra Costilla, charges that pulled the timeline back 30 years. And then there was what they found inside the house. When investigators searched the Massapequa Park home, the ordinary house on the ordinary street, where he had lived almost his whole adult life, They seized more than 350 electronic devices, 27 computers, 58 hard drives, phones, tablets, cameras, hundreds of CDs. They carried it out of the basement of the home he shared with his wife and children. On one of those drives, deleted but recoverable, was a Microsoft Word document. Prosecutors called it his planning document, his blueprint. He had created it around the year 2000, the same year Valerie Mack's body was left in the Manorville woods, and he had gone back and edited it over the years that followed, the way a person refines a project they intend to keep doing. It was a checklist for murder. It listed supplies, things like tarps and cat litter. It noted dump site locations. It contained what read like reconnaissance. It laid out the packaging of a body for transport, and it included reminders to remove trace DNA to avoid the very evidence that would, in the end, undo him. It was not the writing of a man who had snapped. It was the writing of a man who had treated this as work, as a craft, to be improved. In September 2025, a judge ruled that whole genome DNA testing, used for the first time in a New York murder trial, would be admissible as evidence. Legal analysts said it was effectively the end of the defense's case. The 8th of April 2026, 1,000 days after Rex Heuermann stood in a courtroom and said, "I didn't do this," he walked back in and changed his plea. Guilty. 7 counts of murder. District Attorney Ray Tierney asked him, for each victim, how they died. Heuermann answered, "Strangulation. Again, strangulation. 7 times. 1 for each woman. Calm, flat, no hesitation." And then a name that was not in the charges. Karen Vergata. The woman whose legs had been found on Fire Island in 1996, whose skull had waited at Gilgo Beach until 2023 to be identified. Heuermann admitted to her murder in open court. 8. The 17th of June, 2026. Riverhead, New York. The families came. Jasmine Robinson. "A million years isn't enough." Violet Swager looked at him again and said what she had said at arraignment, weak, disgusting coward, and meant it more now than she had then. Maureen Brainard Barnes's children, 7 and 1 when she disappeared, now adults, spoke about a mother they had grown up without. Liliana Waterman, 3 years old, when her mother boarded a bus in Maine and never came home, stood in the courtroom and said it was the day she had been thinking about her whole life. Heuermann asked to speak. "There are no words I can say," he said. "The words I would say have no meaning." Judge Mazet looked at him. "Are you even a little bit sorry?" he said, "for what you did to these poor, innocent women?" Heuermann didn't answer. "Get him out of here," the judge said. There was applause in the gallery as he was led away. Life in prison. No possibility of parole. 8 women: Sandra, Karen, Valerie, Jessica, Maureen, Melissa, Megan, Amber. Between 1993 and 2010, they were killed and left along a road that almost no one walked. Some of them waited decades just to get their names back. Some waited 30 years for the man responsible to face a courtroom. They got there. Shannon Gilbert, the woman whose disappearance started all of this, whose 911 call set in motion the search that found the others. Her death is still officially ruled accidental drowning. Her family still disputes it. Her case is still, in some sense, unresolved. She was the reason they found everyone else. She never got what the others finally got. 30 years, 8 women, a pizza crust in a Manhattan trash can. Some things, it seems, depend entirely on whether the right person throws away the right piece of garbage on the right day. The question this case leaves behind, the one that should outlast every headline, is whether that should ever have been the only thing standing between justice and 30 years of nothing.